Hi, my name is Mohammed Sufyan Muawiyah. I am the director at iBISS and Co Limited. We are the chartered certified accountants and the tax advisors. I'm here to talk today about the self-assessment. What the self-assessment is, this is to collect tax from those people where their tax is not being paid by the employer or at source. Meaning, if you are a company director, if you are working as a self-employed, and if you are renting a property, and if there is a trustee, and if there is any pensioner whose income is more than £100,000, or if any taxpayer, including the pensioners, if their investment income is more than £10,000, they have to do this. People who are self-employed, people who are doing their small businesses and their tax has not been paid, these are the people, these are the few examples I have just given, these are the people who are required to submit their self-assessment tax return. And self-assessment tax return is spanning from 6th of April to the following of 5th of April, which spans for 12 months. And return due date, if a person is submitting, if taxpayer is submitting paper tax return, the due date is 31st of October following the end of tax year. However, if someone is doing their tax return through online, so the due date will be 31st January following the end of tax year. Until tax year 2009, HMRC was very reluctant. If someone has not submitted the tax return, so they normally send the penalty, but in the law it was penalty cannot exceed the tax liability. Meaning, if there is no tax payable, so the penalty is nil. But since 2009, the fixed penalty regime has come into, meaning even if your tax liability is nil, if you missed your deadline, you have to pay fixed penalty. If someone does not submit the tax return on the due date, there is a fixed penalty of £100 straight away. If the return has not been submitted within 3 months of the due date, that penalty will increase to daily penalty of £10, which will accumulate to £900. So, and hence, if the tax return has not been submitted after 6 months of the due date, there will be further penalty of which can exceed either 5% of the actual tax liability or £300, whichever is greater. Meaning, if a person does not submit the tax return within a year of the due date, that penalty can increase from £1,500 to £3,000. So this is a fixed penalty. HMRC, the taxman is reluctant if a person is facing some difficulty financially to pay the tax. You can pay your tax in installment depending upon with the arrangement of the taxman. But to submit the tax return, they are the fixed penalties, as I mentioned earlier. They can be avoided if your circumstances were such that, which were abstaining you to submit the tax return within the deadline. Meaning, if you fall sick or there was some, family issues happened on the due date and you were unable to submit the tax returns. But it is very unlikely HMRC, are very strict since 2010 that they're going to reduce the penalties. We have advised so many clients where we have reduced the penalties, where we have listened to circumstances which have, sometimes most of the taxpayers, they didn't receive the notification from the HMRC that they have to submit their tax return.
Right.
If they didn't have received the notification from the HMRC, that's not their fault, because most of the time, if someone has registered themselves as a self-employed, and now they're working as an employee during the tax year, they forgot to mention it to the taxman, and during that tax year they have moved their houses. So it means the notification has not been received, but this is the taxpayer responsibility to notify to the HMRC that if any, meaning the change of circumstances, either he's moving his address or he has stopped working as self-employed and now he has started working as an employee. Still, this is the responsibility of the taxpayer to notify to the HMRC. I have a recent case with the lecturer, who was working on a freelance basis. whereby he didn't submit his tax return for the last 3 years because he moved from London to Manchester, but he didn't notify to the HMRC, and hence he didn't receive any notification and he forgot to submit the tax return. Then we engage with HMRC and also about his personal circumstances, which stopped him uh, to submit those tax returns, and we successfully claimed actually reduced the tax liabilities. His tax liability, actually his penalties was £6,000 for the last 3 years. We managed to reduce it to a couple of £1,000. Yeah, I have another recently I dealt with whereby he missed all the deadline. Although those umbrella people, those agents, they have deducted his tax at source. He were paying £25,000 tax, and that was lying to those agents. But because he did not submit his tax return, he has to pay 100% of his tax liability, meaning he has to pay £60,000 in total for 1 year. So whereby then we have explained all the circumstances to the HMRC as well as his personal circumstances, whereby his wife, he was going through a separation. So and we reduced those penalties as well to actual tax liability, meaning £30,000 he saved in penalties. Here are the couple of examples which I have just given you out of hundreds of the cases which we have dealt in our office. So if your circumstances are such which has abstained you submitting your tax return, and then you have received the notification for the HMRC containing a lot of penalties, please contact us. We can help you reducing those penalties.